Hey there! I was asked, I asked people what they would like me to talk about, and then someone said, I would like you to talk about handwritten notes versus typed notes and any effects thereof. And I think it's a very interesting topic, and it comes up quite a lot. I'm an instructor at a post-secondary education institution, so I see students almost every day and I see them take notes. And there certainly has been a shift from taking handwritten notes to typed notes. A lot of laptops in class. And I know there are instructors who ban laptops, and I don't want to do that for inclusivity reasons and other things. But in any case, complicated question. However, there seems to be a simple answer. Now, if you're watching these videos, I'm assuming you're a fountain pen person and you probably have some opinions about handwriting. It turns out there is some science behind it as well. So in 2024, a meta-analysis came out by Flanagan and colleagues. So a meta-analysis, if you've never heard of that, that's kind of a special analysis where you take a number of published papers on a specific topic, and then you sort of conduct statistics on these statistics to see if there overall is an effect in a specific direction. That's a bit of a simplification, but that's what it comes down to. And what these authors found in I forget how many studies, but they did their meta-analysis on quite a number of published studies. I want to say something like 20 plus. They actually found that students who wrote by hand, so took notes by hand, I should say, in class, had higher achievement than students who took notes with technology, laptops, or I guess tablets or whatever. They did also point out that, of course, taking voluminous notes is easier when you have technology, right? Like that makes sense. If you have to write down a lot, then typing it may make that easier than having to handwrite everything. But why is this? And I think there are a couple of factors that we should really consider in this sort of research. First of all, handwriting forces you to slow down. If you are a fast typer, which I am not, but some people are. If you are a fast typer, theoretically, if you are fast enough, you could sit in a class and you could type every single word spoken by an instructor. That may sound like a good idea because then you have a transcript of everything that was said. However, there is a certain mindlessness to that task. All you need to do is type, again, in adequate speed, which I understand is a motor challenge in its own regard, but again, if you're a fast enough typer, you can do that. If you type everything someone says, you are not making a selection in what to note down and what not to note down. And I don't think that is a factor you should ignore. So, what I mean by that is this. I am a cognitive psychologist, and one thing that cognitive psychologists are interested in is the phenomenon of attention. And attention can be conceptualized in different ways. One way we look at that is what we call the spotlight of attention, which I always liken to Sauron's eye. You have this sort of searchlight. If your attention is here, well, then it is not there because you're focusing on that, right? If you are taking handwritten notes, you must focus on what is said, and you must make a decision on what you're writing down and what you're not writing down, because nobody can write so fast that they can write down everything someone says, unless you know shorthand. But fewer and fewer people know shorthand, so I'll assume that the average student does not know shorthand. So that attention selection process is an important step. You need to think actively about what to write down and what you cannot write down, because you do not have the capacity to write down everything that is being said. Then, connected to that are levels of processing. I'm sorry, I just kicked my tripod, sorry. Levels of processing means something like this. You can process on different levels the information that comes into your brain. So a classic experiment they have done is they gave people words, and then in the shallowest level of encoding, because then later they tested how many words the people actually remembered. The shallowest level of encoding, people just had to say whether the word was presented in capitals or lowercase. That's very shallow processing because you're not paying any attention to the content of the word. The next level of processing they used, this is Craig and Lockhart, if I remember correctly, classic experiment. The next thing they did was they had participants rhyme. So they gave them the word, I don't know, ant, and then they said, does it rhyme with flip? You got to kind of come up with this in the spot. No, the answer is no. Okay, now you've processed that word a little bit more deeply, because now you're not just judging shallow features like capital versus lowercase, you're looking at the word a little bit, but it's still not the deepest level of processing. In the deepest level of processing, these people asked their participants, can you please use this word that you've just seen in a sentence? Does it fit in this sentence? Okay, so let's say it was ant, and then the sentence is, I went to the ant to buy sugar. It doesn't make sense. That's not how you use it. We're grammatically a fine sentence, but that doesn't make sense. So now you really need to think about the meaning of the word. Now guess what condition participants remembered most words in. The deepest level of processing. Of course, semantic processing we call that, because you're paying attention to the meaning of a word. Well, likewise, when you're taking notes, if you're doing it by hand, you need to focus your attention because you cannot write everything down, so you need to make a selection of what is and is not important information to you at that stage. Of course, you could be wrong. You could write down all the wrong words, right? That could happen. But assuming that you pay some attention, that may not be the actual issue here. Okay. Then there is that level of processing. If you are a really fast typer and you can type every word an instructor gives you, then you do have a transcript of their class, and when it comes time to prepare for an exam or something, you can reread those notes. But the problem is, you never made active effort to store that information into your brain. But if you are handwriting, again, because you're paying attention very selectively, because you are deciding what to write down and not to write down, you are already encoding things. You are already using semantic processing because you are encoding things in your brain, in your memory, so that you can use it again because you're paying attention to it. The mindless typing out verbatim what is said is just that. It's a mindless activity. And that transcript may not be that useful. This is what you have a textbook for, or papers to read, or whatever. There is a source prescribed to you, and that gives all that information. That is the typed out stuff. That is the full story, right? Your instructor is making a choice on what to cover and what not to cover. What is, in their minds, important for you to know. So that handwritten stuff, I think, is very important. And then I would say two more things. One is, when you handwrite, it's really easy to quickly make a drawing or a schematic or a diagram or whatever is required because it comes up in class. That is much harder to do when you're typing, right? So those visual aids help too, because if you create a memory trace that has an image attached to it, it's much easier to remember. What I mean by that is they've done research where they had participants remember lists of words. Again, it's always lists of words because that's easy to remember. And what they did was they gave participants pairs of words, and those pairs of words were manipulated such that some words were easy to picture, like dog or cat. Other words were very difficult to picture, like justice or democracy. What how do you picture democracy? But a dog is very easy to picture. So if you get a word pair like dog, boat, that's very easy to remember because you can picture a dog and a boat. And now when you know dog, you know boat, and when you know boat, you know dog. But if you had to remember, let's say, car, democracy, it's much harder because car is easy to picture, but democracy is harder to picture. And if you got two words like that, like say democracy and virtue, both of these words are very hard to picture. It's very difficult to remember those word pairs. So what did people remember best? Word pairs where both words could be pictured. What did people remember worst? Word pairs where both words could not be pictured. And then the high-low imagery or low-high imagery, depending on where you start, what prompt you give someone in a word pair, those were somewhere in the middle. So what I'm trying to get at is, here too, if you are taking handwritten notes and you can quickly make a drawing, you now have two parts to your memory trace, the actual memory. You have the information and you have a visual. I guess the information and the visual, if we kind of go for artistic stuff, is more on the right side typically, and analytical stuff is more on the left side typically. Anyway, that's not the point here. Two parts to a memory trace makes it easier to remember because now you can think of the concept or you can think of the image, and both of these can trigger that information. So then on an exam, say, you can picture the concept or you can picture the word, and either of those things will help you remember the other half, the other material. When you are typing, that's much harder. Now the question that remains for me, and I don't know if anyone has looked into that, but I find that an interesting question, is what if you write with a stylus on, say, an iPad? Will it have the same benefits as handwritten, like actually on paper? I don't see an immediate reason why that would be worse than paper, but I don't know if it is. So maybe we should do that study and then I can report back. Anyway, there is that. So, I hope this was useful. These are my views on that problem, which is an interesting problem, an interesting phenomenon. I hope this was useful. I hope this answered the question. Science! I'll gladly see you later.